Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. And this week, we're discussing yet another geopolitical shift, this time sort of major agreements announced between Saudi Arabia and China. Last week, Brunello, there was a three-day state visit to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And we saw the signing of a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. It was a really wide-ranging agreement spanning over 30 billion US dollars worth of deals and 35 separate MOUs. Could you point us to what the sort of key aspects of this deal are? What are the key sectors we're investing in, and what does that say about this sort of strategic partnership that we're seeing forming?
So, as you said, President Xi flew to Riyadh and met with MBS, and he was welcomed in the most grandiose way. Kind of a difference to what happened to Biden when he visited Saudi Arabia a few months ago. And the reason is because Xi went to sign a number of important uh, deals. As I said, as you mentioned, 35 memorandums of understanding, an investment worth 30 billion. So there would be cooperation on the automotive industry, on supply chain, on water desalinization, infrastructure, manufacturing, mining, on the financial sector, on communications, cooperation on artificial intelligence, and even on digital and space economy. So it's a very wide-ranging set of MOUs, lots of investment that has been promised between the two sides, and in fact, these amount to what they correctly called a comprehensive strategic partnership, not just a trade agreement, so to speak. It's something much deeper because when you start talking about the use of solar energy, um, cooperation on hydrocarbons, energy efficiency, space economy, artificial intelligence, infrastructure. There's everything in there. So this is not a small deal. This is a big, important uh, partnership agreement that has been signed between the two sides.
I see, and I think this sort of relates quite well to some of the more recent stuff we've spoken about different emerging markets countries caught between this tension and sort of great power conflict between the U.S. and China. We spoke about the role of Brazil, we spoke about the role of India, and I'm curious what this deal means for the role of Saudi Arabia. Does it really mean that it's chosen a side, that it's going entirely towards a Chinese orbit, or is it a bit more sort of complicated than that?
So we said it's a strategic partnership agreement to the point that the two milestone reform plans of the two sides, the BRI initiative from China and Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia, have been agreed to converge and be harmonized over time, which means that this seems pretty much a choice of camp from Saudi Arabia. Now, clearly, the foreign minister of Saudi, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, has been quick in saying, "Oh no, this is nothing to do with us moving away from the US and a Western ally." But what I just said, I think, kind of proves that Saudi is making a bit of a choice. And let's not forget, we discussed in previous columns and therefore in previous podcasts, there's a EMG7 emerging around BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who have invited Saudi Arabia and Argentina to join. So that is a seven-country grouping now. And Saudi is key to that because it brings, of course, the energy component, of which, of course, Saudi Arabia is rich, and of course, also all the other areas of cooperation that I just mentioned. So it is obvious that the Saudis had to somehow deny that they made a choice of calm, but from all intents and purposes, this seems to us going exactly in that direction.
I see. And what I'm sort of also thinking about now is how does, this dictate the relationship between Saudi Arabia and America from America's perspective, and what would America's likely response to a situation like this be? Because we've seen in the past that this isn't the first of its kind. We've seen, particularly during the Russian-Ukrainian war. I mean, despite American sanctions, Saudi Arabia was still able to engage with Russia on the energy front, and still able to profit over that economically quite a bit. And effectively, America didn't seem to have much leverage. Is this a continuation of that trend, or do you see any other mechanisms through which America could, pull Saudi Arabia back in its orbit of influence?
Um, so the Americans have also started this game, okay? Years ago, when they started to say either with me or against me in the war, so-called Cold War II between US and China. And they have left very little maneuvering space for those countries and regions, such as the Eurozone and the EU, who wanted to deal with both sides peacefully. They saw no reasons to choose either camp, but the US were quite adamant, either with me or against me. So Saudi Arabia had very limited space to choose to some extent. They have tried the US, they've been a very loyal ally for ages. Clearly, there was the huge incident of 9/11 that remains a scar once and for all in their relationship. That has not been forgotten. Having said all this is a comprehensive strategic partnership, we said, between China and Saudi Arabia. But to some extent, it seems a little bit less comprehensive, so to speak, than the limitless cooperation that China and Russia have signed together. So it is a strategic partnership, but not as much as Russia has sided with China. So to some extent, Saudi has still some maneuvering space to say there are still close allies of the US for the time being. I don't think the US can really do much about it. They have been the providers of weapons to Saudi Arabia for the security of the region for the last several decades. It's not going to change overnight, but clearly things are changing in that region. And let's not forget, just to conclude, China is also one of the best partners with Iran. And we know that Saudi and Iran are kind of historical rivals. So China has this amazing capacity of dealing at the same time with historical enemies, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel. No other country has this ability. And we need to praise China for this ability of dealing with historical rivals as they were all partners. Maybe the West should also learn of not fomenting divisions and in
Mhm.
conflicts and trying to be friends with everybody at the same time. Admittedly, it's not easy. And sometimes the aggressive stance of countries such as Russia at the moment makes this impossible. So you need to break some relationships and reopening years later. But at the same time, it's kind of a good lesson that it is not a good thing to really fragment, balkanize international relationships at this stage and go into this polarization, US versus China, and nothing in the middle.
Mhm.
That I think is very damaging from the global economy, but unfortunately seems the direction of travel for the next few decades.
Sure. And I mean, you spoke about from, China's perspective, but, also Saudi Arabia seems to be equally good at doing that sort of thing, and, playing different rivals. In addition to China, it's warming up relations to Turkey. Qatar seems to be less of a problem, especially in the sort of relationship with Iran increasingly. So we are seeing a lot of, geopolitical realignment, and Saudi Arabia is very much at the center of a lot of this. And I think a last point to note is, you mentioned in your piece, this isn't just a tactical or trade-based agreement; it's more of a strategic partnership. And possibly maybe the Saudi relationship with the U.S. is moving in the opposite direction from a broader, comprehensive strategic partnership to a more interest-based, trade-based, tactical sort of partnership. But it's certainly one, plenty of relationships that we'll continue to watch in the upcoming weeks and months. As always, Brunel, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.